All right, St. Thomas Aquinas. You'll notice on your outline, I thought about starting where we ended last week, which was touching on the doctrine of double effect. And we are going to get to that, but first of all, I thought we might talk about a couple of differences between Aquinas and Augustine. We hit on this a little bit last week, but there are a couple of things that I think are really interesting that really separate Aquinas from Augustine and affect the way that they view the just war doctrine. One of the things that we have talked about with Augustine, and not so much with Aquinas yet, but was Augustine's view of the fall and view of the nature of man. Does anybody want to talk about sort of a little bit about Augustine's theology in this area? All right, I'll give it a shot. Okay, Augustine had an emphasis on the basis of order, okay, and the disruption of that order caused by man's fall. Augustine was focused a good bit in his theology on the doctrine of what he called original sin, the doctrine of original sin, and the idea that a lot of where we are today, whether it's with the government or with war or with relationships with other people, are the result of the fall. All right. For Aquinas, his view is a little bit different. His view was that government is a natural result of natural humanity. It's not the result so much of the fall, but it's essentially a part of who we are, pre-fall, post-fall, anything else. He had kind of a commitment to what you might call a reasonable moral order, knowable in principle by all human beings, not just those who are. Remember, Augustine talked about basically that there's a city of God and a city of man, okay, and that once you've been baptized, once you've been made a Christian, you have an ability that a non-Christian did not have to understand peace and to strive towards peace. Aquinas, which is a little bit more, again, in the style of Aristotle, would say, no, even human beings, by virtue of being human beings, have this ability to achieve a certain level of peace, tainted though it may be by sin, and have an ability to achieve a civic, virtuous, just, good government. Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
Does that mean without God?
To a certain extent without God. Now, he would not say that it's a perfect government, but he would say that this is inherent in who we are. Now, when you say without God, I should probably say...
God put that in us to do what we can do
right,
without recognizing
right.
God.
It's not that without God. It may be without a Christian acknowledgement of God, but certainly not without God. Because think about Aristotle, for instance, who was one of Aquinas' one of his two greatest influences. Aristotle did not have a Christian, obviously Aristotle being pre-Christ, did not have a Christian view, okay, of government or of war, but certainly Aquinas would say that he had grace and that God was working in him. It was just not particularly a Christian or even he wasn't Jewish. It wasn't a Judeo or Christian view, if that makes sense. So God is still present. It's just even when God is not fully acknowledged, he's still working. We're still tainted by sin, but God endows us with a natural desire towards association with others, towards a common good, a common wealth, which is what Aristotle calls it. And that is part of who we are, okay? It's part of who we are pre-fall, it's part of who we are post-fall. Whereas Augustine really focuses on the disruption of sin in human history and the fallout of that. All right. Okay. And again, I mentioned the city of God and the city of man. Augustine, as you know, as you may recall, clearly distinguishes between the two. Okay, he wrote the book City of God, as we discussed a while back. While he does say that the two do overlap, while Augustine does say that, and while he does also say that if you have a Christian state, such as Rome was at the time, you are closer to the city of God. They do not naturally coincide in essentials. Okay, they do not naturally coincide. Aquinas would actually say, no, that's not true. They do coincide in essentials. The Christian is at home in this universe. All right. We have a natural ability to reason our way to justice. We have a natural ability, whether we're Christian or non-Christian, to reach a moral consensus. Okay. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more of a focus on the goodness of man than on the sin of man.
Was Aquinas the main expositor of natural law?
He was one of the main expositors of natural law, yes. And I don't get into that during this class.
But I think that kind of explains this.
Yeah, I think it does.
To the
Absolutely.
believer, anyway.
Absolutely. And you know, you think about Cicero, too. Cicero may have been the main expositor of natural law. But Aquinas does pick up on that. You're exactly right. It's this sense that we are endowed with a certain ability. And of course, Aquinas would say, God endows us with this ability, where Cicero might say the gods or the powers or whatever, the stars. So you see a little bit of a difference there. And that does inform their just war theory in the sense that Aquinas focuses a great deal, Augustine focuses a great deal, and we'll talk about this too, on the individual punishment of sinners and in war. Where Aquinas focuses a little bit more on the idea of the good of the commonwealth. All right. Now, how does this? They come out essentially with the same answer, but it's a different approach. All right. Not entirely a different approach, because Aquinas takes Augustine, but he also takes Aristotle. So Aquinas has a little bit of a dual approach towards just war. Okay. All right. And that's the second thing. So the first is Aquinas and Augustine had a different view of anthropology, the view of man, and of the natural ability of humanity to form a government. Again, they both believe God is involved, but the issue is the starting point. Okay. Now the second thing, and this I think is really an interesting difference between Aquinas and Augustine. Remember how we talked about the dilemma of the church with war from the very beginning was, how can you, what? Does anybody remember?
Love your enemy and kill him at the same time.
How can you love your enemy and kill him at the same time? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All right. Now, does anybody remember
Love
what?
them to death.
Love him to death. Okay. That's yeah. Well, you know, that's kind of how Augustine reconciled it. Does anybody remember the early church fathers? What did they say about how you deal with this? Anybody remember?
I should remember, but I don't.
They said not even self-preservation warrants any killing.
Right. They
Total
said
pacifism.
total
For yourself.
For your right. Well, they said, first of all, remember the early church fathers did not say, and this is my opinion, but I think I'm right. They did not say war is evil. They did not say the army is evil. They did not say the government is evil. Now this is a sweeping generalization. Of course, there were some church fathers who said that, but in general, there didn't seem to be a condemnation of the military as such. The condemnation seemed to be what?
Soldiers in the military.
Christian soldiers in
Christian
particular. Right, Christian soldiers in the military because of this whole love and killing thing. This was the big dilemma. Particularly, remember, it was the Beatitudes, as well as some other teachings of Christ, as well as some other teachings in the New Testament. But the Beatitudes to a lot of the early church fathers, in fact, essentially to all of them, seem to preclude Christians from serving in the military. All right. Now, we also talked about that second week, some of the responses to that. We don't need to get into that here because the issue really is, how did Augustine handle that? How do you love your enemy and kill him at the same time? How is that possible? Does anybody remember what he said? It was really interesting.
I thought it was like protecting him or getting him to the right end through.
Oh, stop him before he can kill more people
Yeah.
or cause more damage.
That's exactly right, but yes, Susan.
Heart intent.
Right, okay, all right, you've got it. Stopping him before he can commit more damage and the intent of the killer. You're both right, but what is it towards that individual? Because when you say stopping him from doing more damage, that also can apply to how you're helping everybody. But what is it towards that individual that you're doing to
So
help
he
You don't
preserve
hate
his
him, you're
soul
sort of
even
trying
more.
to
Right,
help him.
protecting his soul.
Right,
Trying to
that's
protect
it.
his soul.
Right, you're
Right.
trying to help him by protecting his soul. It's sort of the whole idea of, it's better that the body be killed and the soul be preserved. And that's not exactly what the Bible verse says, but that's sort of the idea. Augustine said you can love your enemy and kill them because sometimes killing is love. You are actually perhaps saving that person from eternal damnation by stopping them. Because remember, to Augustine, only one side is just and one is unjust. So if you're on the just side, these people, your adversaries, are committing a sin by engaging in war, period.